Well, happy Recovery Month, and thank you all so much for being here today, and welcome to the Words Matter Wednesday webinar. I'm honored to be here to explore a topic that is both deeply personal and profoundly communal, and that's the language that we use in faith spaces to talk about addiction, recovery, and healing. My name is Cameron Cunningham, and I work and serve as the program coordinator of mental health and wellness for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. As a general ministry of the Disciples Church, the NBA collaborates with leaders and with health and social service organizations to strengthen and transform communities through compassion, healing, and justice. NBA's mental health and wellness program focuses on creating communities of compassion and care with an integrated vision of wellness that prioritizes a holistic approach centered in justice, equity, theology, spirituality, and even clinical awareness. Now, I do want to note that during this webinar, you may follow along via the automated transcription using the AI generated captions, and you may look at the look for the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to get those closed captions. We will also have a question and answer period at the end of our time today that is brief, but we do want to create space for you to share your comments and questions during this webinar during the Q&A feature. As part of our program area's mental health commitment to justice, wellness, equity, and the upliftment of all people, during September is National Recovery Month, and we are so elated to create space to explore wellness, recovery, and resilience. Annually, the month of September provides an opportunity to celebrate the resilience of individuals in recovery while promoting evidence-based treatment and honoring the dedication of service providers while also supporting recovery in all its forms. It's the stark realities that mental health challenges, including substance use and even behavioral health concerns, it continues to impact generations across the United States of America. According to SAMHSA, 46 million people in the United States aged 12 or older, that's 16% of the population, had an addiction or substance use disorder in 2021. And despite this staggering reality, many continue to suffer in silence due to the stigma, shame, and inaccessible or unsafe support spaces. So today we're here to discuss how the words we use matter. The language we use, it either builds bridges of compassion or it reinforces walls of stigma, shaping how individuals experience support, love, belongingness, and hope. So today we will examine how do we use faith-rooted, person-centered language that explores everyone's journey while fostering healing, inclusion, and empowerment. Together during this time, we will explore practical strategies, reflect on cultural and structural influences, and we'll discuss ways to create compassionate, safe spaces in our communities. Our hope today is that you leave this conversation with insights that can be applied to your ministry, congregation, and networks, helping you to advance understanding of addiction and recovery, ultimately to reduce stigma. And then it's September, so we want to celebrate the resilience and strength of those who have recovered or are in recovery. I begin today by asking you to drop in the chat. What color best describes the feeling that these two pictures bring up for you today? And I'm going to open the chat. Please feel free to post the colors. Green means trust, purple means reject, blue means question, yellow means embrace, red means love. All right, I see a blue in the chat, some question. I see red in the chat for love. I see yellow for embrace. I even see a green for trust. I see someone in the chat says green, yellow, and red. So trust, embrace, and love. I see embrace as well, yellow in the chat. And I would love to, at the conclusion of our webinar, hear some of the promptings of what brought these feelings up for you from this general question. But many of you may have chose these feelings because they represent these two pictures for some family. For some, you might chose trust or love because it represents shared belief, or even better yet, community. And yet, even within community, and specifically including the church, when there is community, there is the potential for a inside and outside group to be established, an in crowd and an at crowd. When persons are made to feel like their experiences are less than or their life is problematic because it's not adjacent to what's been deemed normative, they're oftentimes pushed to feel like a misfit and oftentimes wrestle with accepting false realities that may leave their personal self worth or even their self will or intent wounded. I bring this to us as a starting point today because this is where stigma begins. People are made to feel like misfits. They question their worth. Shame is spread. And too often, as we dive into this conversation about language, it starts through our words. Because, in fact, for many contexts, addiction, substance use disorders, opioid use disorders, it's seldomly spoken about within the walls of many churches and even Protestant denominations. And when it is discussed, it's oftentimes discussed with negative overtones towards the people who are suffering. Maybe language that suggests they made their choice to use. Now they have to live with the consequences. Or maybe statements like, this is sinful behavior that is unacceptable, so they're getting what they deserve. Or maybe the perspective of, we don't have to even worry about this because we don't have anyone that has that problem in our church. But I'm saying this today because words create worlds. And in faith spaces, the language we choose, they hold so much deep weight. So again, our words, they heal, they harm, they either lift or they push down. They invite people into community or they will drive them into deep silence and shame. So I want us to explore this together for a few minutes. I want us to talk about how we name addiction, how we talk about a recovery, and how we even frame healing, and how that opens doors to life or it builds barriers of stigma. So, our goals for the next few minutes is to define stigma. We seek to articulate the role of stigma as a barrier to receive care for recovery, care, community, and I'll say addiction. We want to list and describe a few stigmatizing terms and non stigmatizing alternatives. And then we want to identify beliefs that have contributed to tensions between faith, treatment, and recovery communities in the present and even in the past. And I say it again, our hope today is that you would leave this webinar, that you would leave this conversation with insights that can be applied to your ministries, to your congregations, to your lay leadership teams, to your networks to help you advance understanding, reduce stigma, and celebrate resilience in the strength of those into recovery. So before we dive into discussing briefly person first language, the language of recovery, I think it's important to build the framework that supports why person first language is of the utmost importance in the first place. It all begins for me with what's called the biology of connection. When we think about the biology of connection, it begins with understanding that humans naturally have a biology to connect with each other. So, across studies of mammals, from the smallest rodents all the way to us as complex humans, the data suggests that we are profoundly shaped by our social environments and that we suffer greatly when our bounds are threatened or even severed with people. We might not like this at times, but we are dependent on others. And connection with others, in fact, is a requirement for us as humans. We need assistance. We oftentimes find conformity in groups, in packs, because that builds a layer of comfortability due to our natural, innate nature to be in relationship with people. But what comes to mind for me is the words of the mystic Howard Thurman. I think he does a great job of really pushing this point where he suggests life seeks to always realize itself in wholeness, harmony, and integration with potential. In other words, Thurman says that life feeds on life. And that's a wonderful thought to consider as we think about human relatedness. But just as I mentioned with our picture, the rising and the illuminating concern with groups that become, tied by closeness, or even communities that are formed by shared affinity, there is the urge and the era of this creation of the outlier and the stigmas to be formulated when what's normative is established. So I've said a lot about Stigma. I said a lot about stigma. So the question briefly is, what is stigma? And what does the word stigma originate from? Well, the word stigma, it originates from the Greek word stigmine, and it means to brand, to mark, or to tattoo. It comes from this idea of the Greek society where mark was placed on a slave to identify that they were of a lesser value in a particular social structure. So that is where we get the modern derivative of the Greek word stigma from. It is understood to mean a social construct whereby someone receives a mark of disgrace with the intention to devalue them. Stigma and the processes of stigma, it exists with two fundamental elements. The first is the recognition of a different mark. So that is the mark of difference, disgrace. And then second, it is to use that mark to devaluate or to bring less value to a particular person. Although the Greeks did not, we know, stigmatize individuals because of addiction, substance use, or mental illness, they nevertheless thought that being outside of what was considered normative carried this negative connotation of shame and weakness in character. And that is case in point for many beliefs in 2025. Many in our contemporary society, they have this progress in this process of stigma towards addiction, towards substance use, towards mental illness. And it's within their congregations, within their families, within their own units of self. I mean, we can all probably think about someone who's carried these stigmas, but I want you to understand that all stigma does is it encourages individuals to not seek treatment, to hide their symptoms. And far too many individuals, it's also Suicide Awareness Month. Multiple individuals die by suicide because of the harmful role of stigmas. To go deeper into stigma, we look at stigma and to classify. Here is where the shifting point and the reframing happens for us today, even as we introduce the importance of person first language. And it is understanding stigma and disease. Now, most church members, most individuals will admit they don't know much about addiction and substance use disorder other than what they heard. And many will even say and can just jog their minds and think that they know someone or a family that has someone who has struggled with addiction or even misuse. But sadly, there are few other medical conditions that are surrounded by much shame, stigma, and misunderstanding. You know, when we think about congregations, statistics show that 1 in 7, 1 in 10 individuals have a substance use disorder or an addiction. So if your congregation is made up of 100 individuals, that means based off the statistic, there are 7 to 10 people minimum who have a substance disorder or addiction in your congregation. So there's individuals that are secretly struggling to understand their disorder or their addiction. So when we get into this stigma and disease, again, this is a disorder when we talk about addiction, substance use disorder, just like type 2 diabetes, just like hypertension, cancer, or even asthma. You know, addiction is clinically referred to as substance use disorder. It's a complex disease of the brain and of the body. And what it does is it involves compulsive use of substances despite the serious health or even social consequences. So addiction, it is a illness that disrupts, even conforms, changes the regions of one's brain. So I want you to think about this. You get pleasure whenever our basic needs are met. So when we're hungry and we go get a burger or go get a chicken sandwich, whatever it may be, our basic needs are met and our brain rewards us for this pleasure. When we're thirsty and we go get a nice ice glass of water or a nice glass of Coca-Cola, whatever it may be, our brain rewards us because of this pleasure being satisfied. In most cases, these feelings and pleasures are caused by the release of dopamines in the brain, which reinstate these life-sustaining functions by incentivizing. It incentivizes us to repeat this behavior over and over and over because this is a reward for eating and drinking. Most addictive substances actually cause the brain to release high levels of those same chemicals that are associated with natural pleasure or reward. So there's much stigma that persists around substance use disorder and addiction because of the lack of understanding around the brain being an organ that can defect, which results in symptom rather than us just making blanket assumptions that people are responsible for their addictions. So I know that we may have some clergy or pastors on with us today, and there may be a member from your church that is diagnosed with cancer, and they're in need of a boost of faith in their time of organ defect symptoms. So members of the church, they may come together, they may pray, I'm in the South, so they may bake cakes, they may bring dinners, they may provide prayers and comfort in their time of sickness as it relates to organ defect symptom because of disease. But I want you to consider how stigma will arise if it is a lung cancer or a cirrhosis of the liver from someone who may have been a drinker or a smoker for 20 years. Stigma around substance use disorder and addiction might bring people to actually blame that person as if they're responsible with how their organ, which is the brain and the body, responds to particular substances. So people with addiction should never be blamed for having a disease, but rather they should be supported in getting quality evidence-based care to address their disease. A choice doesn't have to be determined because choice doesn't determine whether something is a disease. Heart disease, diabetes, even some forms of cancer involve personal choices like diet, exercise, sun exposure. But what I want to really hone in is a disease is what happens in the body as a result of choices. So addiction is a treatable disease. Now, I do want to note no single factor can predict if a person will develop an addiction. There's a combination of factors that influence increased risk for addictions and substance use disorders. The first is there on the screen biology. And these are the genes that people are born with. They account for half of a person's substance use disorder or even addiction. The next is environment. That's a person's environment and how it may influence differently from family to friends to economic status to gender qualities of life. Factors such as peer pressure, physical and sexual abuse, early exposure to substances, drugs, stress, and etc. And even development. So when we think about development, it's the genetic and environment factors that play a role in the critical development stages of a person's life to affect addictions or substance use disorders. So the earlier that substance use begins, the more likely it is to progress to be a disorder or addiction. When we think about this, we can all think if we were walk into Walmart right now, or to Target, or to Kroger, or to our local grocery store. Imagine what we expect to hear, or what we expect people to say if we pause and we ask them, what does addiction or substance use disorder look like? If we went around and we posed, what does it look like? How do they smell? We would probably hear more assumptions based off stereotypes than symptoms. And that is the isms that equal the other. That's racism, sexism, heterosexism, homosexism, ageism, ableism, classism. I just listed some there. Bodyism. But that all leads to this idea of the other. These are stereotypes, ideas, ways of division that separate the unity of a community. So all of these that are mentioned as isms, they relegate individuals to the place of being the other. They relegate individuals to be placed in the category of being lesser than an individual. And history records that if you want to ever dehumanize or defame anyone of their identity and self-worth, the first step is to identify them as less than. And second, to begin to press upon them that until they believe it and accept it as a reality. For example, we hear that people with addictions are often characterized as violent. We hear that people with mental health challenges may have been perceived with the lack of capacity to make decisions on their best interests. More in context, there are even slurs that are used to dehumanize people to address them as lower in self-worth. So a person's humanity is threatened and reduced to the ones thinking or making the assumptions about them. I bring this to our attention today because it's these isms that create this idea of the other. I'm not smart enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not straight enough. I'm not black enough. I'm not white enough. I'm not Asian enough. It's the shame that is designed to keep people apart as they are treated as others and separated from others. The extreme is being in prison and unable to take advantage of the full range of resources that can help and serve them. So we must always be asking what customs, what practices, what doctrines within our particular faith communities are limiting access to care for those who have addictions and even substance use disorder. I want to, before I go here, even place emphasis on our millennials and our Gen Zs because they're approximately a median of individuals in this country, over 20 million people. And among those statistical numbers, there is an increasing alarm for our youth and our young people. They are at a higher rate of developing an addiction or substance use than any age group or demographic prior. So let's get into the slurs against substance use disorder and even mental illness. These are terms, the language that is used to dehumanize people and aid in the separation of their humanity based on their condition and disease. Now, you might not have heard all of them, but I'm sure that some of us can say we have heard some of them. I specifically want to make mention of the term that I listed last, substance abuser. That's a term that we hear often, but the term substance abuse or abuser it's usually centered in the term abuse in the similar function of somebody who functions with child abuse or even domestic abuse. But our language changed when we remember organ, defect, symptom. And remember that addiction is an illness, organ, defect, symptom. So, in fact, the one is not abusing the substance, but the substance is, in fact, abusing them in their body. So, when talking to people about addiction, substance use disorder, their loved ones, and even your colleagues, it's important for us to use non stigmatizing language that reflects accurate, not only accurate, but scientific based understanding of addiction. Because clergy and churches and clinicians are typically the first points of contact for persons with addiction, as first responders, it's important that we take the necessary steps to reduce the potential for stigma and negative bias. So I want to highlight, terms like substance abuser, terms like drug of choice. Choice is a behavioral term, not a medical term. No one wakes up and says, I'm going to choose today to have an addiction. I'm going to choose today to have a substance use disorder. Even if they have behaviors that lead to addiction, people do not selectively choose addiction. So, this is why our language is so important. Language matters. We often use language when we're talking about addiction and substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, that is not empathetic to illness as disease. As it relates to addiction, people say things that harbor feelings like they're not ready to go to recovery yet. They don't want it bad enough. They don't have the willpower yet. They haven't lost enough. They haven't heard enough to want to change their life. Even things like they're too resistant or they're in denial. They won't accept the realities of where they stand right now. But we don't say things like this about people who are suffering with obesity. We don't just tell them, just lose weight. We don't say things with individuals who have diabetes, just lay off the sweets and exercise more. You'll be fine. So terms are easy to say, but they're challenging to apply. We won't use language for someone who goes to the doctor, their blood pressure is skyrocketing. We won't tell them, you're just in denial. You're not ready yet. So this premise is not medical. It's not used in a medical sense. So it shouldn't be used where addiction is concerned as well. So this is why person first language is important. Let individuals choose how they would like to be described. I list here a diagram that lists some language of discovery. It is important to use first language and again let individuals choose how they want to be described, allowing them to maintain the integrity and the wholeness that they obtain as human beings. But here are some alternative terminology around those that are in recovery, living, battling addictions. Let's look at some of these. We might use the current terminology that someone is a untreated addict, that they have problems being a alcoholic. But person first alternative literally would be to say an individual is not yet in recovery. Again, see the word abuse there right under substance abuse. That is a terminology that is often used, but a person first alternative is substance use disorder. They have an addiction, they have a substance misuse. Now that we have a corporate understanding of organ defect symptom. There it is again, drug of choice, abuse, drug of use. So here are some, and this is a list: relapse, reoccurrence, return to use. So here are some alternative terminology that allows person first language and wholeness, personal wholeness, integrity, and affinity of self to remain while someone is journeying through recovery. I also want to show you this as well because I think this really names publicly how person first language truly matters. It names publicly how the most respectful way of referring to people is to just name them as people. So you might say again, Alex is an addict. Well, the alternative is Alex is a person with a substance use disorder. Alex is in recovery from drug addiction. Again, it puts the person first. It avoids defining a person by their disease. The terms listed below, along with others, are often people's ineffective attempts to reclaim some shroud of power while being treated in a system that often tries to control them. So we might say, Mary is resistant to treatment. No, Mary's not resistant to treatment. Mary is unsure about it. Mary, at this time, could even prefer not to. You want what we try to do is try to avoid defining people by their behaviors and remove the blame from the statement. So again, these are just some alternatives to show how when we place an emphasis on our language, when we place an emphasis on respecting people as people, we allow them to be supported. We allow them still to be in community. We allow them to still hold on to the fullness of their self-worth even while they journey towards wholeness. So I'm excited that we're able to discuss these things today. And I hope that you've learned something, you've taken something from this, and that even in your communities, we will continue to always be mindful around the words that we share, the things that we say, knowing that it either will build or it'll break down, either to lift up or to leave a base. The character, the ethos, not only of individuals living with addictions or in recovery, but the ethos of our entire communities, our nations, our churches. So the language is extremely helpful. So I'm very grateful that we were able to engage this information. We've explored how the words we use in our faith spaces, again, can either heal or unintentionally reinforce stigma. And I'm so grateful today that we are able and we have joining us today one that will help us to add a practical layer to this discussion. I'm honored to be joined by Reverend Krista Wolf Peters. And Reverend Peters brings a unique perspective as both pastor and a professional working with individuals that are affected by substance use. Her experience in ministry, chaplaincy, and social justice provides us with an invaluable insight into how faith and recovery intersect in real world contexts. Reverend Krista has served in congregations across Iowa and Alaska. She's facilitated programs internationally in Thailand, and she continues to serve both ecumenically and secularly in her community. Her passions include social justice, supporting those who are affected by substance use, and a passion to help families navigate through the journey of healing. She is a dynamic preacher, and she is an even more exciting, strong advocate for compassion, inclusive faith spaces. So, Krista, we're excited to have you here in 2021. She served as a part of MBA's Innovative Conversation Group Addiction Cohort, and we're grateful. I'm very grateful for the research and for the groundwork her and the team did to begin the work that we are developing as our addiction and recovery initiative in our mental health and wellness program. So, Krista, thank you for joining us today. And we're so excited to hear your thoughts as we continue discussing some of the information that was shared today.
Thank you. That was such an introduction. I appreciate that. And I'm grateful to be here and grateful to be, I think, highlighting this as a part of NBA's work, and more particularly centering it in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, because there is not a congregation, a community, um, a ministry of our church that is unaffected by the illness. Um, and I think something that we can do to at least begin the conversation is talking about the language that we use, and a lot of the things that you brought up are um, I think familiar to people that are in it. And yet, I know a ton of people in recovery that still use some of the language that harms and continues to stigmatize folks who suffer from this illness. And so it is a complex conversation, and part of our cohort had conversations around what language we wanted to use, and we were not all in agreement. And so, I mean, it's a pretty cool thing to be talking about today and to be highlighting, because there's still a lot of work to do.
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you. So I want to begin our conversation when we think about, and I named some pieces around stigma and, the utilization and access of resources in faith spaces, in churches, and congregations by individuals who truly need help. And I think about how many individuals will not utilize resources because of the way that they've been spoken to or things I've said that have made them feel like I am struggling, but I want no one to know about what I'm going through because of how I'll be judged or talked about or critiqued. So I would love to hear a little bit about your experience and your work, but then also allow you to share from your experience how how language, specifically in faith communities, impacts someone's willingness to actually seek or utilize help.
Yeah, so I think with all areas of justice and health, particular to illness, that the church has capacity to be a sanctuary of healing,
Mm,
um, or to cause significant spiritual abuse
mm,
that can turn people off not only from resources that will help them heal, but from seeking communities to get well in, period. So uh, I think a big burden of that training should fall within the realm of pastoral care training within seminary education. And I know I still think that I was taught by one of the best pastoral care professors in the country, and we spent a week on it,
wow.
you know? And there's so much there. You can't possibly dive into it, but a week is not long enough for, a pastor who's been affected by a person that has substance use, um, and uh, has their own stigma in relationship to that encounter. Um, it's if you are the parent of a person who suffers from this illness, then uh, it was, your money that was taken. It was your boundaries that were crossed. It was, your feelings that were hurt. And so the behaviors that can come along with the illness leave lasting impressions on people who don't have it
Mm,
that can then reinforce the stigma. And so, and it becomes difficult too. So as a person who's leading a faith community, I am in contact with all the time with people and families whose loved one is suffering from the illness, and there's embarrassment.
mm,
If they've come to me 4 or 5 times for help and it hasn't gotten better, um, then a lot of times, like I'll start seeing people avoid
mm,
um, or not respond, or tell me everything's fine now when it's not. Um,
mm,
and so there's just this big space of I don't know what to do.
mm.
And it people get stuck in that and they're not sure where to go or how to be productive within the conversation and to feel supported, like how to support loved ones who are walking their loved one through this um, when recovery is not what's happening.
Yes.
Um, and then also, like in the chaplaincy setting, where I'm in hospital rooms with people who are detoxing and seeking medical help, uh, the bewilderment of like, I don't know how I got here. Um, I can't believe I did this again.
Mm,
I'm scared to get out. I've already been to treatment 27 times. It doesn't work. Right. So, like, and a lot of times they'll run to faith communities. Um, but if they find that the illness is still present, then they don't feel like they can continue to come to the faith community with the illness. But, like you were talking about other illnesses, we wouldn't tell someone who had cancer that they can't continue to come to church.
yes.
So it doesn't make sense. But we're conditioned as a society because of the behaviors that accompany the illness um, to to create um, outliers. And the thing is like there are boundaries, right? So because of the criminalization of the disease, um, uh, churches have to have boundaries
Mm,
and they have to create safe spaces for children. And but even then, you were talking about, it's this idea that people who use drugs are violent um, and scary or abusive or loud and sometimes they are. And so, how does the church respond empathically with kindness and with generosity to the illness and not the behaviors, while still maintaining safe spaces for the community, right? Because we're talking about that in and that out. And it's not black and white. This is not a um, linear path to healing and recovery. And it takes a lot of education as a leader in a faith community to navigate these things and to teach the community how to navigate these things. But I think it's so important because we're all affected by it.
yes. Yes. No, that is you have shared already so many powerful points. I'm just thinking my mind is going to and as you said just around even the language piece. I think about how there's a term in churches that is used very often and it is backslider.
Mm,
And how oftentimes I've spoken to individuals that are journeying in recovery and they're like, I cannot go to church because if I have a setback, the church is going to say that I've had a relapse and now I'm a backslider. So even thinking around how do you reframe language to really put away words like backslider and, hone in on words that centers individuals as a brother or sister that's on a journey of healing. So again, to your point, really centering dignity. And I've seen when dignity is centered in faith spaces, people are more open to opening up, speaking, and embracing compassion rather than condemnation as well. So you raised for me some major points. As I said, pastors and faith leaders oftentimes stand at the intersection, even as you named, of spiritual guidance and even community care. I would love to hear from your experiences. What can leaders do? What can pastors do? What can ministries be doing to create spaces that truly support recovery, while also nurturing one's spiritual growth as well? Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a toolkit, a PDF to a toolkit that I put in the chat at the very beginning. It's called the Harm Reduction Toolkit for Faith Leaders. And this is an incredible resource. It was put together by Faith and Harm Reduction. And I got it off of the UCC website. Erica Paulette has done a ton of work um, specifically in this area on behalf of the UCC Church, and was one of the writers of this too. And I would recommend that a faith leader start by reading through that toolkit. It's got a lot of the concrete educational pieces that you covered today in the webinar. And it's a PDF or a packet that you can refer back to over time. Um, uh, One of the things that I love about it is that it acknowledges the intersections of systemic racism and criminalization of sex workers with uh, the medical illness of substance use. And so there's just one part that I would like to read.
Sure.
And it says, we are in crisis when whole people created in the image of the most divine are redacted and fractured, reduced to behaviors and pathologies, dehumanized. We are in crisis which stigmatizes and others, our most marginalized neighbors, which limits access to opportunities and rights, to stable and healthy housing, which ensures under and unemployment, which fuels an industry of exclusion and deportation, which limits elevation through education and prevents people from accessing evidence-based drug treatment and life-affirming harm reductions services. We are in a crisis. Most significantly, we are in a crisis which fails to recognize God in Black and Brown people, which terrorizes Black communities through mass surveillance and brutality called policing, which wields racist drug policy to disseminate Black families, which fails to recognize the overdose crisis has long been devastating these communities, which fails to celebrate the lives of people of color, proclaims in silence and through the creation of sacrifice zones that Black deaths are more compelling than Black lives.
Mm. Mm.
We are in crisis. This crisis is an opportunity. This crisis is also an obligation. As people who seek to align ourselves with the higher good, we are accountable to the spirit of perfect justice and love. We are called to participate in the emergence of healing, the emergence of freedom, the emergence of the beloved community. Um, and so when we're talking about community, when we're talking about creating communal spaces and how to do that, um, the main thing that I think is important is to um, educate oneself and start the practices there, um, and then bring other people along into it.
Mm.
It's one thing to um, start a support group. But if we're starting a support group that continues to use harmful language, that uh, continues to reinforce the backsliding instead of if someone has an asthma attack, we don't punish them if they have another one. But with substance use, we do. Um, we want to create opportunities for wholeness and healing, and doing that is truly understanding the medical illness. And even in the medical field, I tell you, I work in a hospital. And even among medical professionals, um, the social and personal experiences of those affected by this illness often uh, override the medical condition.
Mm.
Um, and so I think it's education and it's re-education and it's, you know, uh, really committing to seeing a person who's using drugs or alcohol um, as a whole person right then as they are and understanding the illness of it. There's so many people that will still want to conversate with me and argue with me um, because they've been hurt
Mm.
by the behaviors of the illness. And I get it. I get it. There's not another illness that shows up this way. Mm. So um, I think education is a huge piece, but part of this toolkit is also saying that like prayers without action don't actually mean much if we're still building communities that continue to perpetuate the harms.
Yes.
So it's about creating the spaces. We can't say that we support people in recovery and then demonize access to syringes and Narcan. Um, so it's um, it's both and.
Yes. Wow. Wow. I would, as I said, thank you for sharing that, and that is very again powerful words. Many of us know someone in our families, congregation, community who is walking through recovery, and the question is often for those who are living with addiction and journeying towards healing. The question can be, where do I even start?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. There's, like I said, lots of good work that's already been done by some of our partners as it pertains particularly to faith and these topics. So, faith and harm reduction is one. There are conferences in harm reduction that you can attend or go to. And so, like, a lot of it is self-education. I live in rural Iowa. So, to say that resources are limited is generous. And I think for somebody who's looking for information, if you've never been to a 12-step meeting, go to an open one, right? There's avenues for that. Don't participate, just listen, right? You can meet with a treatment center. You can call and ask, like, hi, I work in this field. I'd like to have more information. What do your programs look like? What are the structures for a family group? Like that kind of thing. They'd be more than willing to share that stuff. Um, there are folks for whom treatment within medical facility is the avenue to recovery. There are people for whom uh, that's not the option. Same with 12 step. Really, like, I mean, it is, I tell people, like, I know what worked for me, I know what didn't work for me, but I am not the benchmark for all people. We have our general minister and president said that one time when we were participating in some conversation about something else, and that just has stuck with me. I am not the benchmark for all people. And uh, when it comes to connecting resources, oftentimes we are on the front lines of that. So when someone comes to me and says they're struggling or they have a family member who's struggling, um, they want to know like where they can go to get help. So being familiar with the treatment centers in the area, being familiar with where folks can get Narcan and clean needles and access to healthcare that will treat them as a whole dignified person is
Mm.
huge. Um, Having support groups within the church are a great idea. There's a Celebrate Recovery initiative that's really popular in churches. Um, you know, and here's the thing, I have opinions about a lot of it, haven't experienced with it. do some of this education about the medical illness, the evidence-based facts and uh, input by people who have spent their lives doing this work, and then also go have an experience with yourself and your body. If you are not in relationship with people who either have substance use or are affected by substance use, I'm like I would be shocked. My I would say that I don't think there is a human on this planet that exists that is not one of those two things. Um, so the other piece is that this is new. All of this is new. Alcoholism wasn't recognized until I believe 1954. Addiction wasn't recognized until 1989 by the AMA. And so all of the things that we know for a fact, all of the things that are science-based and evidence-based and, you know, uh, are largely new, and we are still working. Um, and I think being open to those things. Faith leaders, we have the responsibility to continue to affirm for people who have any kind of illness that they are a child of God and they are loved. Um, and if behaviors which are sinful or cause us to be separated consciously or unconsciously from God um, happen in our lives, like it's all about a path back to right relationship. It is no different than any other deviation um, from the relationship that we have with our higher powers. And so I would say, like, that is our focus. Like, how do I help this person get in back in right relationship with God and with their community?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I mean, it's that simple, but we complicate it.
Yes, yes. No, that is so good. And I'm thinking during my time in seminary, I had an opportunity to work with a church that partnered with a local recovery house. And during my 2 semesters working at that particular church, every Sunday they opened the doors for the residents of that local recovery house to attend service. And they were very clear. We treat them as family because they're in the family of God. And conversations didn't start by trying to fix individuals or give them a different lens of understanding, but simply listening.
Mhm.
And I would be so amazed when I would hear congregants come into the church and would just tell them, "I love you. I'm here for you." And that did for many more than a dozen sermons was able to do. And by the end of the year, I was able to see several of them become leaders in that particular congregation, and it ultimately transformed the entire church community. So to your point, I think there is power in notating publicly and modeling openly that faith and recovery can walk hand in hand. And I think that on the forefront is just so important.
Well, and to be honest, I am a pastor, but I am also a person in recovery. And so, um, when I went to seminary, I believe I I was like maybe 1 or 2 years sober when I started applying. And the question was asked, is this just a phase?
Mm,
You know, um, the idea that a passion for God with someone who has my illness would be fleeting or temporary, or I could backslide, and then there's consequences um, for the body of the church if
mm,
I'm lifted up in leadership. Um, and the thing is we have pastors who suffer from this illness and do not feel that they can access resources because of shame and uh, reputation or ability to re-enter community. But if we are Christian communities, then it's all about building that path back to right relationship with God and neighbor. And so for our faith leaders, don't we want that for them?
mm,
And I think one of the bigger questions that I love as a denominational piece is like, how do we build some type of support for our faith leaders who need help in this area. Um, and there were some just comments in the chat that I wanted to address. Um, Daniel was talking about, a lot of treatment centers and rehabs will give clergy a tour and a walkthrough and how to refer someone to the program. Absolutely. Even on my desk outside, I have pamphlets to the centers if folks want to have that conversation. I've got AA books, NA books, Al-Anon, you know, and uh, and someone else said like Celebrate Recovery tends to be mostly evangelicals. Yep. There's also not like a singleness of purpose. So you could have a gambling addiction, a sex addiction, or whatever there. But like I said, I'm not the benchmark for all people. And an evangelical theology is something that is welcome in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And so, uh, you know, we do not give a litmus test of creed in order to be a part of our churches and to say, is there, but like I said, I have opinions about a lot of these things. Would I participate in them? Do I think, but I would say like doing the evidence-based research of the medical illness will then inform my theology. Um, and so I can, kind of pick and choose what I would suggest to people um, based on how I understand God and how I understand the illness, um, and then use discernment on where to guide people. But it's also a matter of like the person that's coming to me, their theology could be very different than mine, and they might need a resource that aligns with them. And it's not about me. It's not what I believe is right or wrong. It's what they need. And so I'm really the connector. I don't get to inform their decision making. If it's maladaptive theology, we might have different conversations about that. Um, the other thing was that the Big Book was published in 1939, correct. However, it was not recognized as a medical condition until 1954. Um, let me double check that date. And then, sorry, 1956. And then 1987 was when um, addiction was then included. So yeah, yeah. Urban Sanctuary DOC in California has a recovery cafe. Yep. And I believe that was one of the pastors that leads that was one of the people that was in our cohort initially for the conversations around this. Stephen, I believe. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you so much, Reverend Krista, for joining us. I mean, you have brought up some major things. And I also want to note that Recovery Cafe is one of our partners as well, NBA. But we've named some amazing resources, insights for individuals. Don't try to be the counselor, just be a companion. The starting point, I was writing some of them down, is education. Faith communities should reassure families that it's okay not to have all the answers, but what matters most is showing consistent love. And if you're not sure where to start, begin with education and prayer, not only for a person's healing, but for your own patience, wisdom, and compassion. So I thank you for this fruitful conversation. I'm
You're
thankful for,
welcome. But I also want to highlight practice, right? Prayer
yes,
without practice.
yes, in action.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So thank you for that. I mean, you lifted some wonderful points for us as we launch into moving recovery forward this recovery month and beyond. So thank you. Thank you for all who attended. Thank you for all who left comments, wonderful comments in the chat for us. In closing, I do want to note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available for future viewing on our MBA website at mbacares.org. One of the ways also that you can remain informed about our work or involved is to sign up for our newsletter at mbacares.org/newsletters. There are a few check boxes that you can mark to let us know that you are specifically interested in mental health and wellness topics.
Yeah.
We would also later this month love your feedback around Recovery Month. So please look out via your emails to complete the surveys later this month. And if you would love to be a partner with NBA and partner with our work of mental health and wellness, we welcome you to make a financial support. We welcome you to make a blessing. We're very grateful for these blessings. You can donate online at nbacares.org/donate. I do want to briefly, as we wrap up, make mention of what we have upcoming for this month and beyond, and very excited for the remainder of this month. On September 10th, we will have at 7 p.m. our community conversation that is discussing what counts as addiction. We'll dive into a discussion of what is actually classified as addiction. And on September 30th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we will have a special soul care session for 30 minutes that is moving, carrying recovery forward, soul care. So I'm excited for those. And you see those links to be able to register in the chat as well. And I'm so excited as well. I see our directors here. We are hosting the Mental Health Professionals Conference October 2nd through October 4th. And I do want to make mention that the registration in person was extended. So if you're interested in that as well, please see that link in the chat as well. As we leave this place today virtually, I would like to just offer us a few reminding words. The way we name addiction matter. The way we speak about recovery matters. The way we frame healing in our faith spaces matter because our language creates culture. And in the economy of God, words have power. From let there be light to peace be still. So let us shift our language to shift our culture. Let us shift our culture to shift the doors to open in healing. And that is the most respectful way to referring to people is simply people. Thank you so much for being here with us today for this webinar.